Before we get into more of this agreement, can you just help explain how subsidies work? Obviously, it doesn't have to go into great detail because it's different for each country, but this is a big part of this agreement. And the big argument around overfishing is like, we need to stop subsidizing certain fisheries or certain types of fishing because it's perpetuating the overfishing problem that we have. So can you just kind of go into a description for the audience to be like, hey, like, what is subsidies and why is it important to have certain regulations around it?
Yeah, for sure. And there's various versions of of definitions of
Right.
what a subsidy, and especially a fishery subsidy. I'm going to take the WTO definition, and that's generally all my work kind of is based on that because because of this agreement and the negotiations of this agreement. So from the WTO's point of view, a subsidy kind of needs three elements. So it's a direct or indirect financial transfer. So direct, essentially, here's some money. Indirect is like, maybe you don't owe me that money you owed me before. So it's a transfer of wealth. The second part is it has to come from a government or a public body and go to the private industry. It's public to private, indirect or direct transfer. And then that transfer has to, confer some kind of benefit. Historically, there's a lot of reasons why governments might do that. You might want to incentivize the development of a particular sector. So we hear a lot about, subsidies for offshore renewable energy, for example. I mean, we also provide subsidies for offshore oil and gas, but that's a different conversation. So you might want to incentivize the development of a sector that maybe is quite, costly at the beginning of that development. You might want to address social equity issues. You may want to support the wages of certain, sectors of society, for example, or particular jobs that maybe, are really important. We need to kind of subsidize the wages there to encourage people into it, for example, like health workers maybe. And then the other one that we're talking about today is to address conservation concerns. So in the UK, for example, a lot of farmers might get paid to not farm up to the edge of a river or to leave certain fields to go wild or to kind of have this crop rotation. And the government might give them money. So they benefit and then we benefit from this like additional conservation benefit. So there's a lot of different reasons why. Another key reason that's often actually unspoken is this competition element. Particularly in fisheries, if we're all targeting the same tuna stocks, well, if we help out the costs of our fishing fleet, they might do a bit of a better job or manage to get a bit more of that fish or sell the fish cheaper, access certain markets.
Right.
So there's stated reasons or drivers of subsidies, and then there might be hidden ones as well. In the case of fisheries, harm that they can cause, as I said earlier, they can cause what we call trade injuries, which the WTO have largely been focused on. Steel from one nation is being subsidised, so it's really cheap and changes the market. The WTO might step in and be like, you shouldn't subsidise that. So you can get these trade injuries, but in fisheries, we get what we call this capacity enhancing effect, and that's the ones that we kind of call harmful fisheries subsidies. And what that is it's basically that subsidy the government give is lowering the cost of fishing, and or increasing their profits. But let's say lowering the cost of fishing. By doing that, what we end up with is it results in overcapacity. So each fishing vessel or the fleet as a whole essentially gets too big for what the fish stock can handle. So really simply, you have too many boats chasing too few fish, right? And instead of like in what you might call the free market, situation, some of those vessels might drop out or go bust because there's not enough fish. I can't make profit. I have to leave. But if you start reducing the cost of fishing or reducing the cost of fuel, for example, you kind of maintain this fishing fleet at a scale, at a size that wouldn't actually exist based on either the size of the stock or the economics of the fishery. So we kind of artificially hold these fleets, at a size that we wouldn't really see without the subsidies. And that's overcapacity. And when you have overcapacity, it tends to lead to overfishing. Yes, you can have really strict rules in there that prevent that, but the science kind of shows that doesn't always happen, as we talked about just a minute ago, right? You can have these stock assessments say, only take X tons. Yeah. But it's even harder when you've got boats and, a lot of huge inflated industry on this particular fishery maybe saying like, we need more tons because otherwise we're not going to be able to pay all these hundreds of thousands of workers potentially.